Good morning and welcome, newcomers, members, friends, to Sunday worship at Central Unitarian Church on this rather bleak midwinter morning, January 22nd. I'm Susan Springstead, a longtime member here, and pleased to be serving as your worship associate. Central Unitarian is an inclusive community that welcomes diversity of identity, of expression, and of individual spiritual beliefs. Within these walls, many of us have experienced unanticipated moments of inspiration, of hope, and renewal. Perhaps you will find such a moment during today's service. We are a community of all ages, including children and youth, who are the future of our faith tradition. We recognize that different ages pay attention in different ways. Each Sunday, it is our hope that we will create a space that works for all. Silence and stillness are not our goals, but a time of worship shared between generations. We are always grateful for those who helped to create the service. This morning, they include our music director, Matt Anderson, our invisible technicians for Zoom, John Freund and Phil Sosinsky, our welcome hosts, Elizabeth Stewart and Patricia Joseph, our coffee hosts, George Johnson Orban and Karen Clemens, and of course, our minister, the Reverend Andrée. In 1969, when my husband and I came through these doors with young children, we were looking for a community to awaken and stimulate their spiritual natures without indoctrination. CUC became that community, and as it turned out, we all grew here. We were cradled, we were celebrated, and we were challenged by both ministers and members to develop the best self that lay within us. If this sounds like something that you need in your life, I urge you to continue coming here Sunday mornings. If you are a first-time visitor, you are welcome to sign our guest book here in the front of the sanctuary and to take any of the pamphlets which interest you. If you are visiting online, you are also able to sign the guest book by following the link in the chat at the bottom of your screen. In that spirit of welcome, let us take a moment to turn and greet those around us. And now we have a few announcements. The Committee on Shared Ministry is looking for volunteers. This committee evaluates and makes recommendations about the state of our ministry at CUC. They work closely with Reverend Andrée, but their purview includes the ministry as it is practiced by our congregation, of which the minister is only a part. Final committee members will be appointed by Rev. Andrée and the Board of Trustees. If you would like the details and want to apply, please see this month's bulletin online. Covenant circles are back after a December hiatus. This is our monthly group exploration of a spiritual theme. All are welcome to join. We just ask that you take some time to read the monthly spiritual journal that was distributed at the beginning of this month with the bulletin. There is one taking place today at noon in the lounge with Robin Kanata. And you may also today join the Reverend Andrée for Sunday tea in her office at noon. This is a great way for newcomers and existing members and friends to meet with our minister while enjoying some tea together. All are welcome. And if you are not taking advantage of that tea with the minister, you're invited to stay for coffee and conversation here in the sanctuary. Now, as we enter into our time of worship, I remind you to silence those electronic devices, and we invite those who are at home to have a chalice ready to light as we light the one here in our own worship space.
I have a couple more announcements to share. First, today is the 50th anniversary of Roe v. Wade. Hard to believe it's been 50 years, and hard to believe we're in a world that's very different than the years following the passage of Roe v. Wade. But there are a number of protests and marches happening throughout the country, and there is a women's rally happening this afternoon at 1 p.m. in Westwood. I am going to be there. It's meeting on the town green next to the gazebo there. It's being organized by one of CUC members, Denise Corsi. So if you'd like to join me at the Women's March this afternoon, I encourage you to come along. I'll be leaving here around 12:30 or so. I also have some paper in my office to make signs. So if you want to come for the tea time and make signs while we drink tea, you may do that. Also, in the same spirit, next week we're going to have a guest minister who will be preaching about the topic of the anniversary of Roe v. Wade. The ministers in this area are doing what we call a big pulpit swap, so we're all switching congregations for a Sunday. I'm going to be down in Montclair, but visiting here will be the Reverend Dr. Tracy Spurls, who currently serves as the interim minister over in State College, Pennsylvania, and she'll be preaching about the legacy of Roe v. Wade and where we are today. So please be sure to come and enjoy that service. I'm going to take a moment to pause my computer because it's making noise at me. Hang on. That's better. Today's service, we are celebrating winter. We're taking a moment to consider the gifts of this season, which is often very much maligned for the cold, for the darkness, for the irritations we get with things like snow and ice. But there's many gifts to be had in this very necessary season. So in that spirit, our opening words this morning are Seasons of Our Life by the Reverend Richard Fuchs. Creator of all times and seasons, and all the seasons of our lives, we gather in this place, thankful for the days that have been, even those that have tried our souls, and hopeful for the days that shall be, even those that shall demand of us the best of what we have, of faith and hope and courage, till we have become one with ourselves and Thee in all the seasons to come, from the glad renewal of spring to the summer autumn days of green and gold and yellow, and the shining colors of fruition and harvest, to the white wisdom days of winter, where all things wait in patience for the change that shall bring transformation. I invite you to join me in saying our words for lighting our chalice. They are in your order of service, or also up here on our screen. We light this chalice to remind us of our dreams, to nourish our heart, mind, and spirit, to work towards a world for all, to embrace the whole of our human experience, to honor our past and our gifts of the present, to create a community where each of us may find healing, transformation, and hope. I invite you to rise in body or spirit for opening hymn 134 in the gray hymnal, or also the words will be up here on the screen. Our world is one world. The first time I ever saw snow, I was actually about 7 years old. My family lived in Central California, where I was born, and we decided to take a summer vacation to Yosemite National Park. And even though it was the middle of summer, I believe it was June, one day we drove up high into the mountains to find a field of snow, which was still in the process of melting. This is something that me and my brother had never seen before. So we were running around the field doing our best to pick up this kind of crunchy, melty snow and, of course, throw it at each other, because what are you going to do but have a snowball fight the first time you see snow? And after this short visit, we drove back down the mountain, and that snow became a memory for me, at least for a few more years. See, our extremely mild winters in California came with cold and rain, but they lacked the majesty of four seasons that are experienced elsewhere, such as here in New Jersey and elsewhere on the East Coast. And snow in particular, where we lived, seemed like a fiction. It appeared on movies and television, and during the winter holidays in December, I remember a lot of stores would take white paint and paint fake frost or fake snow on the windows. So we had this feel of Christmas, because even in a place where it doesn't snow, I guess it's not Christmas without snow. But my experience of winter changed when I became 10 years old and my family moved to New Jersey. We moved in February, and as luck would have it, my second day of school turned out to be a snow day. So I reveled in the joy of having a day off, wandering around our yard. I remember pretending to be in a character in a movie stuck in drifts of snow in some sort of Arctic landscape. And I marveled at these massive icicles that were forming on our house. A few of them I could just reach up and break off, and I could suck on them, this winter treat that I never thought possible as a California kid. This is the time I feel like at 10 that winter became real for me, not something I just saw in movies or read in books. And our hilly yard, which was not very popular with the neighborhood kids during the other times of the year because you really couldn't play any sports or games, it was just too hilly, became the popular meeting spot in winter because we had the best sledding hill. As long as you avoided the trees, which was a little hard to do and did lead to a lot of bruising and crying, and fortunately no broken bones. And after heavy snowstorms, we would build these massive forts and have these epic snowball fights. Even for a while, shoveling the snow was a bit of a novelty, for a little while at least. And the whole winter experience was now revealing itself to me once my family moved east. But like many of my peers, as I got older, the marvel of winter eventually faded for me. The ice, the snow, the cold, they became a burden more than a marvel. Snow became a chore, something to be cleaned and pushed aside. Ice and slush became a hazard, something that's dangerous to walk on or drive through. And all of this even more as I became an adult and I became a city dweller, where these chores and hazards only seemed to multiply, where winter became, instead of a time of enjoying what was there, dreaming of spring and waiting for winter to just be over with. Now, occasionally as a young adult living in the city, I would still glance moments of that winter mystery. Most memorably, this happened when storms came by that were so big that they even made a city stand still. I remember one winter when living in Boston, we had a late winter snowstorm that dumped a foot of snow on April 1st, after the city had already put all their snow equipment away for the winter. And I remember walking through these empty boulevards just filled with snow when the streetcars and the automobiles were completely stopped, and people were even cross-country skiing down the middle of Massachusetts Avenue as a way of enjoying this storm. One season when I lived in New York City, I remember a series of storms that left us with snowbanks that were several feet high. I remember walking my little terrier, who was bundled tight in her red jacket, with her walking next to me at shoulder height as she walked on top of the snowdrifts. And we just traveled through the falling snow together. But these memories often faded quickly in a world where snow turned to gray slush because of all the pedestrian and auto traffic, and a commute to work involved navigating these gigantic puddles of sludge, which if you weren't careful, you'd step in them and sink up above your ankle and have to walk to work with wet feet and wet legs. Winter in the city seemed like an unnecessary but inevitable burden, something to escape with travels to warmer destinations, or something to be ignored until the warmer days returned. But my romance with winter finally came back to me when, now as an adult and having a family of my own, we moved to Vermont. In northern New England, there's no way to escape or even ignore winter. It arrives typically on schedule, typically sometime around Thanksgiving, and usually lasts at least through Easter. And there's something marvelous about snow there's nothing marvelous about snow in the forecast when you're living in northern New England. There are many times when I opened up my phone and looked at the app, and there was just a snowflake every day for 10 days that becomes meaningless after a while. Getting up in the dark to shovel your car out of the snow is simply a part of your regular daily morning routine, like brushing your teeth or making breakfast. And figuring out how to keep your walk free of ice or how to keep your pipes from freezing were also regular activities of the season. Shortly after I moved up there, neighbors warned me to keep supplies in my car for when I drove off the road in a snowstorm. Not if, but when. Luckily, I never actually drove off the road, but there was more than one occasion where I was white-knuckling it down a road, not quite sure where the line was between the road and the field next to the road, and hoping I could make it home safely. Those same neighbors suggested that I find friends and activities in the fall when I first moved there to keep me connected to others, because once winter started, I would never see anybody again until April or May. This was a slight exaggeration, but not much. Neighbors who I saw every day out in their yard or on a walk left little trace of their existence during the winter months, other than shoveling their walk or noticing that their driveway had been cleared. But the exception was that people who live in this cold climate, while they hunker down in winter, they also I quickly learned to make it outdoors whenever possible. Many of my friends and neighbors dropped everything, including going to church on Sunday, to hit the ski slopes after a good storm. And in my town, those who weren't hitting the ski slopes went to the local golf course, because the golf course had the best sledding hill in town. So families would gather for immense sledding parties in our local golf course. And taking time to walk in a snowstorm, to make a snow person, go sledding or go skiing, were important ways to keep up your spirits during the long, cold, dark days. Because there are other ways you had to figure out how to survive. I know for me, I was working at home, my kids were at school, my spouse worked out of the house. So during the day, I was the only one home, and in order for us to save money, we turned off the heat in the whole house, or at least turned it down so the pipes wouldn't freeze. And I would sit around my space heater in my office, and my dog would join me, and we would keep huddled in my office. And by the end of the week, I hadn't seen anybody but my family, so I always made a point of going to have breakfast at the local diner on Fridays, and going to church on Sundays, so I could actually see physical human beings during the wintertime. And these were common things that people learned to do to get through these cold, dark winter days, especially the isolation, the cold, and very real things like seasonal affectiveness disorder, which affects many people during this time. So such habits that I made were part of a whole mindset of wintering. I learned to take on these different habits, as well as others like cooking more, reading more, taking time to snuggle under blankets to watch a movie together. Winter was a slower time for reflection and contemplation. And now that I live back here in New Jersey, with much milder winters by comparison, I find that I have to work harder to get into that wintering mindset, because Mother Nature doesn't give me the same prompts as way up north, forcing me to get into a different rhythm. I have to be more intentional about it. But wintering is vitally important to me. Taking time each year to slow down, to reflect, to enjoy the quiet, cold, darker days, while also learning to protect myself from that dark and cold. And I find that these are important habits for me to keep. They help make me more resilient, and they help me appreciate springtime when it actually comes. So these are my thoughts, these are my reflections, my relationship with winter. But what about you? How did you experience winter as a child? What is your relationship with winter now? In what ways do you approach wintering? These are the things that we are going to consider in our service today.
Part of our mission here is to encourage all who gather to grow more generous in spirit and action. This is the great end of all the world's faith traditions. The offering is one of the many ways we practice that all-important generosity of spirit in order to get the job done. We give as we are able of our time, of our talent, and our treasure. Today's offering will now be gratefully received. And now will you join me in dedicating this offering using the words that are printed in your program or on the screen. We dedicate these gifts in service of our mission to welcome all into a home of spiritual diversity that challenges us to become our best selves, to minister to one another in love, and to serve the greater community. Thank you.
Now we enter into a time of meditation where we share together the joys and sorrows of this community. We do this every week as a way of caring for each other. I'll begin by reading out loud joys and sorrows that have been submitted here for those that wrote one on their way in and perhaps lit a candle. Then I will turn to those online and read any joys or sorrows that have been input there. So at this moment, I would invite you online to share any joys or sorrows in the chat. And then finally, I'll turn back to this room and ask you to share out loud the name of anybody else you're holding in your heart today. After this sharing, we'll enter into a moment of silence, followed by a prayer and a hymn. So let us begin. Let us take a breath together, breathing in a breath of life, breathing out a breath of peace. As we enter into this space of holy listening, as we share together the joys and concerns for this community for Sunday, January 22nd, 2023. So now all these joys and all these sorrows, both spoken and unspoken, let us hold them together in our hearts as we enter into a moment of silence. Spirit of life, we turn to you on this bleak midwinter morning. We turn to you in hopes of resilience to help us through the dark, cold days of winter, to help us through the winter seasons of our lives, and to remind us that another season will always follow, for that is your way. After the cold and the dark and the rain and the snow, there will be sun and clear skies. And even in those bleak days, may we find time for rest, for comforting each other, for caring for each other, for caring for ourselves. Because such is the way of wintertime. Blessed be, and amen. I invite you to stay seated for this next hymn. This is, we've been singing this all month, Find a Stillness. It's 352 in your gray hymnal. The hymn is also up here on the screen.
The reading this morning is one that I have read several times over. It is a very lyrical description of winter. You may even want to close your eyes to visualize the words. It is a poem called Winter by Reverend Greta Crosby. Let us not wish away the winter. It is a season in itself, not simply the way to spring. When trees rest, growing no leaves, gathering no light, they let in the sky and trace themselves delicately against the dawns and sunsets. The clarity and brilliance of the winter sky delight. The loom of fog softens edges, lulls the eyes and ears of the quiet, awakens by risk the unquiet. A low, dark sky can snow, emblem of individuality, liberality, and aggregate power. Snow invites both contemplation and sport. Winter is a table set with ice and starlight. Winter dark tends to warm light, fire, and candle. Winter cold to hugs and huddles. Winter want to gifts and sharing. Winter danger to visions, plans, and common endeavoring, and the zest of narrow escapes. Winter tedium to merrymaking. Let us therefore praise winter, rich in beauty, challenge, and pregnant negativities.
So as I mentioned, our theme this morning is wintering, and that's also the theme of our spiritual journal, which hopefully you all take time to look at each month as we distribute it. There's a number of readings and exercises associated with a spiritual theme. We use them for our covenant circles. I use it as a guide for our conversations for our monthly soup lunch. And so this month's journal is wintering. And it seems odd as I've been considering this theme that we've reached a point in human history when we have to intentionally take a moment to notice the effects of a naturally occurring phenomenon. But our modern living combined with the effects of climate change means that we are further and further removed from the effects of this season. Of course, as I've mentioned, there's real dangers and challenges of the season, from extreme cold to the rising expenses of heating our homes to the depression that comes with seasonal affectiveness disorder. But this season also brings with it a very necessary rhythm. There's an author, Catherine May, who focuses on the importance of wintering in her book titled Wintering: The Power of Rest and Retreat in Difficult Times. She writes, "Plants and animals don't fight the winter. They don't pretend that it's not happening and attempt to carry on living the same lives that they've lived all summer. They prepare, they adapt, they perform extraordinary acts of metamorphosis to get them through. Winter is a time of wandering, of withdrawing from the world, maximizing scant resources, carrying out acts of brutal efficiency, and vanishing from sight. But that's where transformation occurs. Winter is not the death of the life cycle, but its crucible. Once we stop wishing it were summer, winter can be a glorious season in which the world takes on a sparse beauty and even pavements sparkle. It's a time for reflection and recuperation, for slow replenishment and for putting your house in order. She goes on to mention that doing these deeply unfashionable things, slowing down, letting your sense of time expand, getting enough sleep, resting, is a radical act now, but it is essential. And May, in her book, explores an important part of modern living in her book, because she argues not just for wintering as a natural season in our climate, but she argues for the importance of wintering as an internal season. This connection to us having different seasons of life. Of course, all life has its seasons. All life, beyond just human beings. So even in locations where the seasons are much more muted, there's still cycles. And we need these changes, we need these cycles. We need times of growth and times of rest. Land that is not left to fallow for a period of time will become infertile. And likewise, when we don't provide ourselves with periods of rest and allow ourselves to remain unproductive for a time, we burn out from exhaustion. So winter has much to teach us and much for us to learn for healthy living. May points out in her book that in ancient folklore, we're often given a cyclical metaphor for life, one in which the energies of spring arrive again and again, nurtured by the deep retreat of winter. She continues, we're no longer accustomed to thinking in this way. Instead, we're in a habit of thinking of our lives as linear, a long march from birth to death, in which we mass our powers only to surrender them again, all while slowly losing your youthful beauty. This is a brutal untruth. Life meanders like a path through the woods. We have seasons where we flourish and seasons when leaves fall from us, revealing our bare bones. And give time, they grow again. So I think that her writing and her contemplation on wintering is particularly poignant because, as I've said a couple times already, our drive as modern humans is to ignore winter. And this became most apparent to me in my experiences when I lived in Vermont. What I didn't mention earlier when I was sharing some of those winter memories was that at that time, I was working remotely from home for my job at a global bank. This was before I went into ministry. And most of my coworkers, therefore, lived elsewhere, and they lived in much warmer climates, and they were often in urban climates. And so these were the people I was talking to every day, and my winter experience seemed like novelties to them. But so was my wintering mindset. This taking time to slow down and appreciate the gifts of the season instead of seeing them as an obstacle to productivity. And so this started out in the beginning when I first moved up there, that started out as a joke. Oh, look at Andrée, she's pretending to be a country person. We know better. We knew her when she lived in the city. She's just like us. But over time, this joke kind of faded, and it became clear that I was cultivating a type of groundedness and a type of restfulness that many of my coworkers either craved or just clearly didn't understand. And winter became one of those factors which actually widened the gap between me and my coworkers the longer that I lived apart from them and the longer that I continued this job. In our reading from Reverend Greta Crosby, which Susan shared, she says, "Let us not wish away the winter. It is a season in itself, rich in beauty, challenge, and pregnant negativities." I love that ending. It feels so full of possibility, beauty, challenge, and pregnant negativities. And I worry that too much of us are losing the gifts of winter in the 2020s especially. We don't take time to appreciate the wintering mindset. During our soup lunch this month, As often happens, I asked some questions around our theme, and we sat around and shared experiences of, a lot of them from childhood in winter, and some from adulthood, our relationship with winter. And it was interesting in that room to hear so many people still expressing a joy with winter. But so much of the magic in the stories of what I heard were in the past. And I worried about that. I think of my own stories that I grew up with, hearing my father and my grandparents who grew up in Holland talk about skating on the canals in Amsterdam. I would hear these glorious stories where everybody had skates, even if they were just some blades that were literally nailed to a board that you tied to your feet. This was a winter activity. And yet now, the canals in Amsterdam, in the last 10 years, they've only frozen over 3 times enough to actually skate on them. So I worry that these experiences are disappearing, and that magic from winter is disappearing from our lives. And it's not just because winter is getting milder in many places due to global warming, but it's also because our modern conveniences help us to shut out the winter. The way we have modern heating devices, we don't have to worry about so much, but also our use of light. During this dark time of year, we still light everything up to the skies. I mean, you drive around here in New Jersey and everybody's lighting up their yards at night. This was something that I didn't experience much in northern New England, where most of us let us sit in the dark. And even in our houses, we have all these electronic devices, right? I plug in my phone and it sits on my nightstand and, it's emanating a little bit of light all night. And same with tons of devices that are all around the house. My spouse and I have actually gone around and taped things over many of these little red and green dots that are all over the place so that we can actually have some darkness at night. But it's not only the global warming and the increase of use of light that bothers me, it's also our seeming desire to want to continue to shut out unwanted aspects of ourselves, which are a crucial part of those internal winter seasons. There's a hyper-focus in our modern culture on productivity and happiness, and I worry about that, especially when I look at the younger generations. We don't give room for the messier, harder parts of life which prepare us for the joys of springtime and first summer. And the interesting thing I found is that in May's book, where she's talking about wintering, half of it is about the physical experiences of winter, but a majority of the book is really about her depression and her life crisis, which led her to quit her job. And it's really about embracing a winter season in her life. She questions our need for control and certainty in our lives and suggests that we all need times for meandering and uncertainty, which are definitely qualities of a harsh winter, for sure. We need those moments in our life. And I look at how much we try to push it away, especially the way we communicate with each other these days. Our social media, as an example, it's so easy for us to post dog pictures and cat pictures and pictures of the entire family all dressed in the same pajamas. And these are good, but are we also sharing with each other the harder aspects of life? I look at the younger folks, I look at my kids constantly getting displayed to them through social media feeds, other people's projections of themselves, and they're comparing those outward selves to their inward selves and feeling more alone and isolated instead of feeling connected. I had a friend of mine in Vermont who started posts that she called Truthful Tuesdays. So instead of all these happy-go-lucky pictures, every Tuesday she would try to share something that we normally try to hide from the world and just put it out there on social media. So her entire sink overflowing with dishes Her laundry room with piles of unwashed laundry. She just put it out there for everybody. And a bunch of us jumped in on this. Like, yes, we're all dealing with this. So let's not pretend we've got these posh, organized lives. There's a messiness to life that we can laugh at and enjoy and share as humans. Because the truth is that wintertime will come to us all, regardless of whether we want it to or not. And those of us that take time to learn how to winter, especially the difficult kind with cold and wind and snow, which brings everything to a standstill, working our way through that will bring resilience for the inevitable storms that life will throw our way. So I encourage you this month to take time to really experience winter. We've experienced an intense holiday season. Within this congregation, we are holding a lot of loss. We're grieving the loss of a number of members and family members and friends. Many of us are still processing big decisions we've had to make around our congregation and in our building. So we all in some way need the season of winter right now. So take some time to read maybe our spiritual journal, contemplate the gifts of the season, find ways to get outdoors and experience the land and the trees in a different state from the lush, vibrant offerings of summer, and consider what might you find in the quiet and the solitude and the darkness of winter that you might miss other times of the year. So in closing, I want to share some more words from Catherine May that she used to close her book. She writes, "To get better at wintering, we need to address our very notion of time. We tend to imagine our lives are linear, but they are in fact cyclical. I would not, of course, deny that we are gradually grow older, but while doing so, we pass through phases of good health and ill, of optimism and doubt, of freedom and constraint. There are times when everything seems easy and times when everything seems impossibly hard. To make that manageable, we have to remember that our present will one day be our past, and our future will be our present. We know that because it's happened before. The thing we put behind us will often come around again. Things that trouble us now will one day be past history. And each time we endure the cycle, we ratchet up a notch. We learn from the last time around, and we do a few things better this time. We develop tricks of the mind to see us through. This is how progress is made. But one thing is certain. We will simply have to leave things to work. We will simply have new things to worry about. We will have to clench our teeth and carry on surviving again. In the meantime, we can only deal with what's in front of us, one moment at a time. We take the next necessary action and the next. And at some point along the line, the next action will feel joyful again. And so, in closing, let us not wish away the winter. May we celebrate it as a season in itself. May we recognize the lessons it has to offer, rich in beauty, challenge, and pregnant negativities. And in the spirit of being in that cycle and being part of the earth and the universe, I want to close with a celebratory hymn, one that many of us love, Blue Boat Home, which is 1064 in our teal hymnal. Lyrics are also up here on the screen. I invite you to rise in body or spirit.
Will you join me as we extinguish our chalice in the words that are printed in your program or on the screen? We extinguish this chalice flame, but not our promise to each other, to act with grace, to hold each other in love, to serve this community and our world. This promise of the heart serves as a reminder of how we live together. May it bring joy to our collective lives.
Our closing words are by the Reverend Dr. Andrew Pakula. May you know fully and deeply the blessings of each of your heart's seasons, the inward turning of winter, springtime's lush renewal, the effortless, steady growth of summer, and autumn's rich harvest. May your passage from season to season be blessed, eased by hands to hold and by the light of love to guide us on. Blessed be, and amen. Thank you, Matt, for our music this morning. Thank you, Susan, for being our worship associate. Thank you again to Phil and to John for our tech. Please join us for coffee and conversation. Remember, there is a card going around for the Wanda Myers, and I will be in my office in about 10 minutes for some tea and sign making if you would like to join me for the Women's March in Westwood this afternoon. Thank you all.